Hey guys, I'm not a luthier. In fact, I'm a rank amateur. But I just recently spent a few weeks fixing up a guitar that I had bought that I was disappointed with, and here's a video of how I did it. Life is full of disappointments. Recently, I bought a new guitar. This one here. It's a Seagull, which is a Canadian brand, handmade in the eastern townships of Quebec. Really good brand. It's a Godin brand, and it was supposed to be a very quality guitar. And when I checked it out at the guy's house, I thought it was okay. And when I got it back here, it had severe intonation problems, and I'll demonstrate that in a minute. Okay, let's talk about intonation. Intonation on a guitar means that whatever you tune the string at, when you go to the 12th fret, it should be exactly one octave higher. On this guitar, the E string has very severe intonation problems, and let me show you. When I hit the deep E, so that's pretty close, that's good, that's the E. When I push my finger on the 12th fret, look at that. It's bouncing between very high E or F. That is way out of intonation. Here's what I think the problem is. I don't think the nut is fitted properly. The nut is actually tilted inward a little bit. The E string is actually making contact further back on the nut instead of right up at the front, which is where you want the string to make contact. And that's making this side of the string to the 12th fret longer than this side. So the guy wouldn't take it back, and I decided, well, I'm gonna have to fix it. So I'll talk about that in a minute. But as part of fixing that, I noticed that I'm going to have to shave the bridge. So as guitars get older, you know, the whole neck assembly can kind of bend up a little bit, and your action will rise, your strings will rise up. And on a electric guitar or a guitar with a detachable neck, you can just take the neck off, put an angled shim, like a 1/4 degree shim in there, and I've done that on a lot of my electrics, and it'll tilt the neck back and you can get your action. On an acoustic, you would have to melt the glue and take the whole neck off and reshape the dovetail to put a shim in there to make that work, and I'm not at that skill level. So what people do is they shave down the bridges, and the problem with that is after a while, let's see if we can show you here, after a while, maybe go to this side, the bridge gets so, the saddle gets so close that you don't get a very strong break angle as the string goes over it. And the only way to fix that is to shave the bridge. And that just basically means, you know, sanding the bridge down. So I had gone, before I bought the Seagull, I went and checked out this Jasmine, which is a very cheap brand. They used to be a Takamine brand. It's not anymore. This one actually is branded Takamine. It's kind of like Epiphone Gibson. And I had gone to look at this, and when I played it at the guy's house, it had a severe buzz. So I was like, no thanks, man. And then I went and got the Seagull. And then, you know, I found out with the Seagull, it's gonna need work and I'm gonna have to shave the bridge. So I went back to this guy, I said, what's your best price for this guitar? And he said about $100 since it seems to be broken. So I bought it, and I've already done it, but I shaved this bridge down. I sanded it and I re-oiled it, and so you can see it's pretty high, and it has a really strong string break. I haven't reamed out these peg holes so you can see how tall the pegs are sticking out. So I dropped about 2 millimeters off of this. But you see how nice and sharp that string break is, and that's what I'm gonna have to do. So, but for beginners, you know, what is this all about? So besides the buzz and the need to shave the bridge, this neck also has a severely bowed neck. Even when I tighten the truss rod all the way, I can't achieve any back bow, which is what you need so that when you tighten your strings, you have just the right amount of arch. So I'm gonna have to fix that on this one, and I'll show you what I'm gonna do in a minute. But I wanted to address this buzz. What do you think that is? What do you think could be causing that? I discovered, in this case, it's the tuning machines. Watch this. The tuning machines are loose inside, and it's a cheap guitar, and so those are cheap tuning machines. If I can fix the bow in this neck, and I decide to keep this guitar, then I will order some $18 to $20 tuning machines just to replace those. They will still be cheap, but maybe it'll work. To fix the bow in the neck, I'm actually going to do something I saw on the internet. I'm going to heat the neck, and I'm going to use a couple of braces to bend the neck back a little bit while I've heated the neck to loosen the glue to soften the wood, and then I'm going to leave it clamped until it cools, and hopefully that will solve that problem. So I've never done that before. I'll take a photo of it once I'm done and share that with you, and we'll see what it looks like. So that's the problem with the Seagull, and fortunately I believe it's just the nut. So I've ordered a new nut for that. That won't come here until after Christmas. So we'll, hopefully I'll have a video of that afterwards. But I believe that that is what I'm gonna have to do for this. Because the height of these strings is so high, I'm gonna have to shave the saddle a little bit so that I can shave the bridge so I can shave the saddle to adjust the string height down to get it so that it's the proper distance above the frets. You know, you don't want it to be too low or you get buzzed while you play, but if it's too high, you stretch the strings too much when you push it down, and you get a dead sound when you play. All right, so this is what I was going to show you. I have the strings completely off. I have completely slackened the truss rod, so there's no tension on this neck other than the natural tension of the wood. This is a guitar scale. This is a tool I bought from Stu Mack that allows you to determine when your neck is perfectly straight. You can see when I run my finger behind, don't look at the holes, look at the space between the holes. You can see my finger through the gap that's under this straight edge. With this guitar, when I tightened the truss rod all the way, even with the strings off, I still had relief. I never got back bow, and that you shouldn't have that. When you attach strings to it, the strings will try to bend the neck up. So when you attach a truss rod to it and you tighten the truss rod bends the neck back to counteract the bowing of the string. In this case, I can't tighten the truss rod enough to counteract the pressure of the string. So what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to heat the neck, and I'm going to apply clamps very slightly to try to bend the neck back until it's just about perfectly straight. To add the thinnest veneer, and I mean the thinnest veneer possible of competency, I've taped a stick to the headstock and taken a measurement of the before, and it's basically 2 3/4 inches. But so I'm going to bend it by 1/4 inch. I think I'm going to start with that. Oh, that is a really annoying cat. I'm sure at least one of you wondered, how do I plan to heat the neck? Yep, this is how. All right, I've got it all clamped. I heated it for approximately 5 minutes with the iron. The measurement is now 2.5 inches instead of 2 3/4. So I've got a 1/4 inch of bow. I made sure that the guitar is still down. It didn't lift up a little bit. So I'm going to leave this now clamped probably for 12 hours. Probably I'll pick it up maybe tomorrow. Maybe what I'll do is I'll heat it again tonight and then let it cool overnight and then take the clamps off tomorrow and see what the result is. So one of the other things I need to do on this guitar, which is the Jasmine that I'm practicing on, is I need to sand down the saddle because the saddle is too tall. The action on the guitar is too high, and I expect that to continue even after I fix the bow and the neck, assuming that gets fixed. I've made a mark on the bridge for where the current saddle is, and I'm checking the radius of the neck, and as expected, it's about 16, maybe more. That might be 18, but since I'm probably going to pull the frets on this guitar anyways, my sanding block is a 16 radius, so it's going to end up being 16. So what I'm going to do is take this saddle out, and I'm going to trace a line with the correct radius so that as I file it, I can maintain the radius of the saddle. There you go. I've got my new line drawn. I'm going to put that into a vise and file it down. Okay, I've got the saddle in the vise, and the tool I'm going to use to do this is just a regular metal file. The reason I use this is because it leaves a very smooth cut. It takes a long time, but it gives you a lot of very good precision. Not going to bore you with the entire process, but basically I'm going to file this down till I get close to that line. Then I will recompensate it, and then I'll be putting it back in the guitar. I'll do a full setup, check the action. If I feel the action needs to come down a little more, assuming everything else on the neck is okay, then I'll come out here again and take a little more off. This one, I'm pretty sure you're not going to be able to tell, but I'm checking to see if the original saddle and nut were bone in the Takamine. I should call it a Jasmine because it's not a real Takamine. It's really easy to tell the difference if you have something to compare it to. This pin is plastic. After I listen to this, if it sounds like I can't hear anything, I'll try to record it with the other microphone. This is the nut. This is the saddle. This is the plastic again. And this is a bone saddle that I know is bone. Bone, this Jasmine. Bone, the Jasmine. So what I'm listening to is a very slight chime. And although it's not as strong as the new saddle, the frequency is roughly the same. So I'm thinking that this is actual bone. I wasn't sure because when I was filing it and I produced this pile of dust, normally bone, when you file it, it has a kind of a salty smell to it because it came from an animal, right? The plastic doesn't have any smell except for plastic. And it has a very non-resonant sound to it when you tap it. Even if you drop it on the table, versus bone. I know you can't hear it, but there's a high frequency chime almost, not like a bell, but you can hear it that's not present in the plastic. And so that's one of the reasons it's very important to make sure you have good quality materials in your guitar. I think these are okay. I'm going to put them back in the Jasmine because I think they are actually bone, possibly. I don't know, they've got some holes down at the bottom that might have been cast marks, so I could be wrong. But even if it's not bone, it has a nice sound to it. And I'm not spending a lot of money on this guitar until I find out it's worth keeping. Once I find out it's worth keeping, I'll probably order a set of Graphtec bridge and nut. Graphtec has a really strong chime to it, even more so than bone. And despite what people say, Graphtec is a superior thing to put in your guitar to actually transmit the sound. If you're a purist and you say, oh, it's got to be bone, bone is great. Everyone uses bone in high quality guitars. If you want to have a really clear transmission of sound, Graphtec actually transmits the sound better. All right? And the reason for that is that it's a manufactured bone material, and so it has a perfect consistency. Bone has chambers in it, that's what makes it resonate, but as a natural product, it has chambers of different sizes, so not every bone thing will sound exactly the same. And sometimes that's good, sometimes you get a really good one, but sometimes you might get a bone that's a little bit dead inside, pardon the expression. With Graphtec, you don't get that problem. Hello, quick update. This is the inexpensive Takamine guitar. It is actually a cheap guitar. And I normally don't use the word cheap because it implies low quality. However, in this case, if you look, let's see, you can see that to make the neck, they glued 2 pieces of scrap wood together to make the neck. So in my opinion, that qualifies as a cheaply made guitar. The truss rod has become stripped. I was trying to tighten it a little bit, loosen it, trying to explore what the action is. I over tightened it, and when I loosened it, I left the threads behind. So I've stopped sanding to try to correct the bow, and I've actually ordered a couple of seam knives from StewMac, and I am going to go ahead and take off the fingerboard and replace the truss rod. I'm really excited about that. Never done that. Always wondered if it, how hard it was. So looking forward to that. And when I do that, I'm actually going to try planing down the bow in the neck. Really, since the trying to bend it didn't work, it just sprang back into place, which is good, I guess. It means that the neck is not too soft. But on the other hand, I wasn't able to fix the bow using heat and clamps. So once I get the fingerboard off, if I get that off successfully, I'm going to run it across a planer to try to get the bow out. I'll see if I can replace the truss rod. If I can find one that will work, then I'll glue the fingerboard back on, and we will continue the adventure. We'll see how that goes. And another note, this is my Seagull guitar, which is supposed to be a higher quality guitar that I have to fix the intonation on. I've also determined that there was a hump in the neck right here. So over time, your guitar starts with a straight neck, right? And it attaches to the body. And over time, the neck could develop a bow, okay? And sometimes what happens is where it attaches to the body, it'll dip down below the body and then come up over the body and then dip back down again. And you get this kind of hump where it joins. One of the reasons is the body of the guitar actually can start to dip in. Over time, the constant tension will cause this part of the body right here to maybe sink a little bit. That also happens back here on some guitars from the tension. It'll push this part down. And there's a couple of fixes for that. For this guitar, it's not so bad. And I've had this problem before. I had this problem on my Epiphone. And basically what I did to fix it is I just sanded the hump out. So what I've done is I've pulled all the frets out, and in case you're wondering how that happens, it's actually pretty easy. I have a sort of a claw clippers here. And all you do is you put a little bit of water on either side of the fret, and you either heat it with the iron or sometimes you use a soldering iron. And then you just really carefully pull the fret out with this claw. You have to be really careful because the fingerboard, this rosewood, is extremely brittle. And it's easy to just crack it right off and have a big chip in your fingerboard that you have to fill in or just live with. Oh, I also have to shave down the neck because one of the problems is, or the bridge, one of the problems if you do this, instead of ungluing the neck and putting a shim in to tilt it back and straighten it, if you're gonna sand the neck down, you're gonna end up dropping the point where the strings, I mean, you're gonna have more of a gap, right? And so in order to lower the action, you have to file down the bridge. And when you, or the saddle, pardon me, I'm really messing up. And when you file down the saddle, you end up getting the saddle too close to the top of the bridge and you don't get that break angle that I told you about. So this saddle right here, this saddle is almost flush with the bridge. And because someone's already tried to lower the action on it at least once because of the bowing of the neck. So I'm going to shave down the bridge part so that there will be more saddle sticking up, and then I'll be able to drop the saddle a little bit more as well. So I'm going to work on both of those items, and if I find anything that's noteworthy while I'm doing it, I'll film it, and then we'll see how it turns out in the end. Okay, got myself set up. I've taped off the guitar. I taped over the sound hole to keep any dust from getting inside so I don't have to vacuum it later. I put tape on either side of the neck in case I accidentally, come off this while I'm sanding, because I'm clumsy that way. I taped around the bridge because after I sand the neck, I'm going to move on to shaping the bridge. And what I've done is I've wrapped several layers of tape around the top of the neck to provide elevation for the sanding block. So this is my sanding block that I got from Stuart McDonald or Stu Mac, and I've only applied the adhesive tape to the back half of the block. So as I'm putting this here, the tape is lifting this end a little bit, and I've got a gap on either side of the hump, and I'm sanding on the hump, and I'm just going to be sanding back and forth like this. And you can probably already see that it's starting to sand away exactly where I want it to, okay? And that's the top of the hump. So I'm going to start with the 80 grit to get down to the point where the neck is mostly flat. Then I will go through the other grits to smooth it out. I will then probably sand the entire neck to get a uniform color, and then I'll apply some kind of oil, probably tongue oil. I just talked for like 5 minutes and didn't realize I wasn't recording. Okay, so this is where I'm at so far. I sanded a lot of the hump down, and then I switched to putting an entire length of adhesive sandpaper 80 grit, and I'm sanding the whole neck now. And what you can see is there's a line that shows where the fingerboard is diving into the body. That's not going to get corrected, and it doesn't have to. If you look where the cutaway is, I just need to be able to play up onto these frets. And that would have been obstructed from the 12th fret by having that hump right here. So I'm doing pretty good right there. As I sand the entire neck along the bass E string, I've actually got a fairly good sanding all along it. On the treble side, there's this part here that hasn't been sanded, and that represents a dip on that side of the neck. You know, over time, sweat, whatever. So another thing, you have to do is when you're doing this, you want to constantly be checking it to make sure that you're not adding a twist to the neck. And so what I usually do is I usually look at the binding in the distance, and I judge based on that. But the goal is going to be to continue lightly sanding until the sanding marks from both sides are evenly matched all along the neck. And then I'll move on to the smoothing out. All right? Okay. So I've got a smooth sand mark on both the treble side and the bass side with this little divot in the middle. It doesn't have to be perfect because there's going to be frets, and you can take up a little bit of the wobble with the fret. So what I'm going to do now is I'm moving on to a radius block. This is a 16-inch radius, meaning if you were to draw a 16-inch circle, the radius would be the curvature would be 16. You can kind of see the curvature right there. That's the shape that I want my fingerboard to be, because it's just a very common, very, in between shape. And then I'll start going progressively through the grits to make a nice finish on the wood. The sanding of the neck is complete. There was one little part that cracked off right here. And I'll show you how I'm going to try to fix that later after I test a couple of things. And one of the problems with having a crack right on the fret is that the edge of the fret is going to be sharp. So if you run your finger up and down and it's not flush, you can cut yourself, or just, it's annoying. Anyways, I'm about to apply the tongue oil. I've used teak oil as well. In this case, I'm going to use tongue oil because after sanding, a lot of the grain popped out. There's a lot of grain visible in the areas that I sanded. And so I'm going to do several layers of tongue oil and let it harden. And then scrub it down with a little bit of steel wool to try to get those the grain to blend a little more. I've done this on buttstocks for antique rifles, and it's worked pretty well. But anyway, so there you go. That's the finished product. Nice dark. You can see the seagull still looks pretty good. Next step is going to be shaving the bridge. I don't know if you can see, but there's a difference here between here after I put oil down. So there's definitely a different texture. This was the part that didn't get sanded enough. So I'm probably going to sand that a little bit to try to make it blend a little bit more. But there's also, like I said, hardwoods have a deep grain. So obviously, as part of their finishing process, they had filled in the grain with something, maybe their lacquer or whatever. So I'm going to have to work to fill that in. But shaving is exactly what it is. I have a small hand block, and I just shave down the neck. Now the neck has a sort of a belly to it. It goes, or the bridge, the bridge. It sort of bumps up and comes down. So as I do this, I also want to make sure that I don't get it like perfectly flat across. Also have to make sure that I don't go so deep that the slot is too shallow to hold the saddle. Basically, I just want to go down enough so that the saddle can sit in there better. So here's the saddle. And what I did is I drew a line on the saddle, and as I shave it, I will put this in until I see maybe 2 millimeters of the line showing. and that's when I'll stop shaving it. All right, I've finished working on the fingerboard. I've got a nice finish on it with the tongue whale. The next step before I fret it is I need to fix chips that are right on the fret line, because otherwise when I put the fret in, the edge of the fret is going to be like a razor blade. Okay, this is how we fill in a chip. All right, I've put a barrier of tape along where I want to form the filler. And I have this small bottle of powdered ebony. I ended up actually using up all the powdered rosewood, and I don't want to sand anymore. But I basically just scoop out a little bit of the powder and drop it in to the gap that I want to fill in. And I am going to be filling in part of the fret cut, and I don't mind that because I can just cut that out. But I press it in a little bit and then scrape it off. For the thin super glue, they make a little tip that you can use to more precisely put the super glue, but I'm just going to go ahead and put a drop on each of the places. And you can't see it, but I'm doing it up the neck in further places as well. And I'm just going to let that harden. I can actually see that a little bit of the powder sank in where I put that on, so I'm going to actually top fill a little bit of powder there. And then add just a little bit more glue on top. Now the super glue does leave a mark on the fretboard, which is too bad, but I will try to sand that out and blend that in as best as I can. So now I'm just going to wait for this to harden, and then I will lightly sand it to blend it in, and then I'll clean out the channel where the fret goes. Okay, so I'll film that when we get to it. As you can see, it looks a little bit ugly. I've adhered a piece of 220 sandpaper, and I am lightly, and I mean lightly, sanding the super glue and ebony powder off. And I'm using a block. You should always use a block for this kind of thing, because your fingers are soft and they will sand over bumps and cause divots on the other side of the bump. In this case, I want to sand all the way down to the rosewood, all around the part that I filled in. Let's clean that up a little bit, see what we got. Looks pretty good on the top, and I am going to lightly sand along this fingerboard. I always hate doing that because the fingerboard is done with lacquer. If you want it to make it look nice again, you have to use lacquer on it. Okay. And you can definitely see, you know, that I'm going to have to refinish that. But I've got it smooth on the top, smooth on the side. The only thing I need to do now is recut the fret slot. And you have to be really gentle with this, because it's so easy to just grab that whole patch that you just put in there and pull it right out. Okay, so I've cleaned out the slots, checked them with this gauge. That one I feel could go down a little bit more. I apologize, I thought I was ready, but I'm not. So I'm gonna scrub that one out a little bit. What's interesting is when you use the super glue this way, it actually becomes quite a bit harder than the wood, and it's takes a little bit longer to clean out or saw out if you've used it to fill in a nut or not. And I've made a ton of scratches up there. Okay, so that's done, and let's apply a little bit of oil to it and see what it looks like. A bit on the side. There we go. I'll just go ahead and do the whole board again. This part that I just sanded will end up being a little bit lighter, and I'll have to coat it a couple more times, but the repair is essentially complete, and it looks as though it will work just fine. And it's not that prominent, which is good. And the black just kind of blends in with the wood. That one, there's still a little bit of a chip there. However, it's flush enough that it won't cause problem with the fret. There's another one I fixed over here, and that one's not bad enough to fix. So all in all, pretty happy with the results. And I'm gonna let that oil set again, and I'll move on to the next thing. All right, one of the last steps to take care of on the two guitars that I've been working on. Both of them I sanded and shaved the fingerboard on, but when you drop that down, your pins don't fit anymore. You can see how high that one sticks out. Not a hard fix. All you do is use a reamer like this and just ream it out until it gets to where you want it to be. That's about right. Just like that. It is about to get real up in here, bro. My package arrived from StewMac. Got these knives here. They're called seam knives. And this is what I need to begin pulling up the neck. Whew. Pretty nervous. I don't mind telling you. I don't mind telling you. Okay, I made my first access. Over here on the side of the sound hole, I was able to slide the knife underneath. Haven't gotten through on this side yet, but I can feel that it's pretty close. Okay, I have a knife under each side. I definitely think that underneath I may have damaged the edge of the circle pushing the knife in. The knives don't feel like they're melting or pushing through the glue so much as they are cracking it. So I don't know, I wonder if I need to turn up my iron a little bit. Right now the iron is set to polyester, and I'm wondering if that's not hot enough. But I'm gonna try, I'm gonna leave the iron on here for like 5 minutes straight and wait and see if that allows any sort of progress, and then I'll just keep at it. The video I saw of a guy doing this, it looked like it took him quite a while, so this is probably gonna take me some hours to do. And as I make more progress, I will add you back in. Long-term heating is definitely the key. As soon as I just stop trying to go too fast and put the iron on there for 5 minutes, walked away, not out of the room, of course, but I went over, did a little bit of work for 5 minutes, came back, and it was like a knife through butter. So definitely, if you're going to do this, don't rush the heating. Making good progress here. One of the things I've discovered to do is not only to let it sit for a long time, but I'm actually using the two different knives together. So I'll push one knife in as far as it can go, and then I'll use the other knife over the top of it. And that keeps me from digging into the wood or getting caught on the what do you call it, the truss rod. And so that seems to be really making things go a lot faster. Disaster has struck on the other side of the neck from where I was working. I didn't notice, but the knife started slicing into the neck material. So I am going to try to remove this neck from the other end, or remove the fingerboard. If I can get started from the other end, perhaps that piece of wood can be separated and I can super glue it or epoxy it back into place. All right, the fingerboard is off and the guitar is destroyed. So the glue that was attached onto the body, that came up pretty easy. But the glue that was attached to the rest of the neck, for some reason, it was like super hard to get through. And as I was trying to slide the knives under, I kept actually getting underneath the wood. And I started cracking the wood away from the neck. Now, keep in mind, this is an inexpensive guitar, which I know is relative, but I bought it specifically because I wanted to practice shaving the bridge before I did it on my more expensive guitar that needed to have that done. What's interesting also is that the truss rod appears to be glued in, or at least it has become glued in, possibly because of the glue that they put on the neck. So it's completely impossible to remove. The heat of the iron did nothing on this part of the neck. I left it on there for at least 15 minutes and it just didn't come off. So I have to wonder that since this is a mass market guitar, maybe they used a higher strength adhesive just to make sure that the neck would never delaminate as it was transported across the ocean. Because I've seen videos of people doing this on on better quality guitars, and it wasn't as hard as it was for me. This took me like more than a day to do. So this guitar is done. It served its purpose. It was a very nice guitar. We'll miss it. Not much. My new Graphtec nut has arrived. I thought it wasn't going to arrive until the 30th, but it arrived today. It's the 23rd. And I don't know if you can really tell, but the original nut, I think, was an electric guitar nut, and it's very flat on top. And that was what was causing the problem. Now, you could have fixed that by channeling out the grooves where you put the strings. But it was also a problem with the angle here. The nut was tilted sort of like this. And so with the new nut, I sanded down the back of the new nut so that it perfectly is flush against the fingerboard. I don't have enough frets to completely refret it, but I put one on there because I wanted to check how the intonation's doing. So let's just tune that on a little bit. There we go. That's on, and so I'm going to press the fret down, and the action is super high, so it's going to go sharp. I also need to shave down the saddle to lower the action. That's how you lower the action on an acoustic. And I did a little work here on the holes, but I need to carve some slots for the strings so that works better. But let's go ahead and check the intonation. So I'm just going to push it down and tweak it, and let's see if it's any better than it was before. So, all right, so that's on, right at the fret. Only a little bit sharp. And that can be attributed to probably the action. The other string, the E string here. Okay, that's right on. Dead on. Just a little sharp. So yeah, I think this is going to work out great. So as much as the other guitar failed, this guitar is on track to being exactly what I want. I sanded out the hump, so I've got a nice straight neck. I just need to wait for my frets to arrive. I'll refret it. I'll sand down the saddle. I'll work a little bit on the peg holes, and then we will be done. Okay, I have the frets on, and I've done an initial dressing. Basically, I have this block that has a file on it at an angle. And after I put the fret in and cut it off, I run this file along, and that's what gives that nice beveled edge. But the edges are still sharp, and eventually I'm going to have to take a file and carefully deburr that edge, but not yet. The next thing I have to do is I actually have to level all the frets. Even though I've put them on neck that I sanded and the neck was level, not every fret went in to the slot the same depth. And once I get it all set up and ready to go, I'll show you that. All right, I have the guitar prepared. I've wrapped tape in between every fret to protect them. And I've taken a Sharpie and I've drawn a black line across the top of every single fret, like that. So now I've got my sanding block, and I have just a 320 grit on there, and I'm going to just sand a little bit like this. So when you look at what gets sanded, it shows you which frets are high and which are not. Okay, and where they're high and where they're not. So as you can see, still where the bump was, high frets, and where the bump wasn't, low frets. And then the first fret and the whole thing is high. Really, I have quite a bit of sanding to do on this to get the frets level. Now, before I did this, I used this the scale to make sure, to make sure that the neck itself was flat again. I unadjusted the truss rod to make the neck flat for most of it. And that's important to do, to make sure you do that. Otherwise, you're not going to get level frets, obviously, if there's a curve in the neck. Okay, after sanding, I've got pretty good, uniform marking all the way up to the point up here, where, as I told you before, the neck kind of starts to dive down, and I don't care about that. I did get this guitar because I wanted to be able to play up the neck on most of the treble strings. And you'll see that there's a little bit of a couple of black spots there. And that indicates that the fret is a little lower than the other frets. So I'm going to put this fret rocker on here. And I don't know if you can hear it, but there is just a little bit of a rock which means that this fret is higher and theoretically could cause buzzing if I'm playing on this fret. This dark mark here in the middle doesn't rock at all. So I'm not worried about this one that's right in the middle. This one over here, I'm a little bit worried about, so I'm going to sand just a little bit more, and then I'll start polishing. Okay? It's very important, if you're doing a job like this, to make sure that the frets don't rock before you string it up. Once you put an arc or a relief on it, you no longer have a perfectly flat neck. And if you've got a rocking fret at that point, you've got a really high fret. Right now, all these frets should be pretty much flat and level with each other. So if there's any that are rocking, it could indicate that there's a loose fret that popped up while I was working on it and needs to be either pulled and replaced or just tapped down with a hammer. Okay, the next and nearly last step to refretting a guitar is to recrown it, okay? Normally a fret has a round dome like this, and it's got a tang that goes down into the neck. By sanding it to level them, we've created a flat spot on top of the fret. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to file the edges to try to get it to have a sort of a barn-shaped top. Okay? I have two tools that I use for that. One, I have a very small safe edge file, and that means that on one of the edges it's perfectly smooth and rounded. And I use that to clean up the ends of the frets. You recall I said after we used that special thing, the edges are quite sharp. So I use that to knock that off. But what I also do is I run it along the side of the fret a few times at about a 45-degree angle, and I do that on both sides. Okay. Check, make sure I have the safe edge down, otherwise it'll cut through the tape. The reason you use a safe edge is because usually files have sharp edges, and it'll cut through the tape. If I used a regular file for this, and it would score up the fretboard. I know that because I've done that. All right, so I've just created a 45-degree bevel like that. And the top of the fret I painted black with the Sharpie. Now I'm going to use a special file. It has a safe edge and diamond edge on the other. Let me see if I can get the light over here. Okay, I don't know if you can see that. And what that does is that basically files one side of the fret. So I put that on here, and I run that back and forth about 20 times. 19, 20. Then I flip it over and I do it again. And this has a flatter angle than the 45 I was doing manually, and it should be putting almost like the roof of a house, you know, a low-angled house. Hope you're counting because I lost count. I'm going to say that's 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. And then I clear the dust, and what I expect to see, as soon as I find out, you know, where the camera is, what I expect to see is a thin little black line right across the top of the fret. And that's exactly what I see. And that means I have a nice thin peak right there in the center of the fret. And that means that fret is ready to be played on. So I have to do this for all of these. You can see some of these have pretty flat tops. So I'm going to have to do that for all of the frets. It takes me a few hours to do it. And then once that's done, I'll just clean up the edges of the ends of the fret. I'll dress those. And when that's done, the guitar is almost ready to be played. I just have to do a regular neck setup, and it's good to go. It's 12:30 at night. The frets are done, polished and dressed. By and large, they're pretty good. I'm happy about this. All right, the guitar is mechanically complete. I've got the bridge sanded, I've refretted the neck, all the frets have been added, I've got the new nut installed and slotted close to where I want it to go. The remaining work that has to be done is called the setup, the neck setup. And a neck setup has 4 or 5 things that you have to do, and you have to do them in order. The first thing we're going to do is adjust the truss rod so that the relief of the neck is correct. And then the second thing we're going to do, once that is done, is we're going to adjust the nut to make sure that you don't have to push down too far for when you're playing your open chords, otherwise the strings will go sharp. Once that's done, the third thing we're going to check is the shape of the strings. I'm going to make sure that the saddle holds the strings in the same shape as the neck, the radius, which you remember is 16. After that's done, then we will go ahead and adjust the action. And the action is the height of the strings above the frets. And then finally, the last thing we'll do is we'll adjust the intonation. And the intonation, as I explained at the beginning, was the original problem with this guitar. Okay, first step is the action, or not the action, the relief, the curvature of the neck. The way you check that is you put a capo on the first fret and you hold the string down on the last fret. And then you look to the 8th fret and you check to see what is the, how much is the string moving. And an appropriate amount would be about 0.008. Now you can adjust this as much as you know, to your own playing. If it's too low, then as you play up the neck, you're going to get buzzing along every fret. And if it's too high, you're going to get your strings to go sharp. So I've got a feeler gauge here at 0.008, and I'm just going to slip it right under there, and I can see that it's not moving the string at all as I slide it under. And I'm going to move up to a 10 to make sure it's not too high. Let's see what we got here. And I can see as I try to put the 10 under there, I can see the string starting to lift a little, and I'll check it with the magnifying glass just because my eye isn't as good as it used to be. That makes me sick. So yeah, I can definitely feel that with a 10, it lifts it. With an 8, it doesn't, and that means the relief is okay. Time to move on to the nut. Okay, when adjusting the action on the nut, or the height of the nut, it's similar to the process of doing it for the truss rod. I'm not going to actually film myself doing it. Maybe I'll do one, but It's something I do very slowly, so it's not terribly interesting. But the way you do it is you attach a capo to the 3rd fret, and then you look at how high the strings move up and down. And if you have a nicely polished fret, like mine is currently polished, you can actually also gauge the height by looking at the reflection of the string and when it meets. If the action is too high, you use a slotting file like this one, which comes in different gauges. And you use the one for the string that you're using, and you basically just file the nut slot down a little bit lower. You open the back of it, and you want to file at an angle so that the slot is in an angle so that the string only makes contact right at the front, or at least is done on the front. I'm still not thrilled with the way that this nut is setting in there. However, I'm going to go ahead and finish the guitar setup and play it and see if I have any problems. And the next time I change the strings, I'll probably work on this a little bit more. It just looks like it needs to be made more flush. These are great to use if you buy them. The set's not too expensive, but don't pay too much for a set of needle files here, or wire files. Welders use this tool to clean out the tips of their welding rods, their welding nozzles. It's the exact same thing that you can buy online for doing guitar nuts, except they charge you a bunch more if you're buying it as a guitar set. So basically, these round files come in many different gauges, and after I cut the slot depth to where I want it to be, I'll take the correct size round file and I'll run it in there to make the channel round, and that will prevent the string from binding and making that ping, ping, ping sound when you try to tune it. All right, so I'm going to get working on this. I won't film it. If you happen to overcut the slot, then you do exactly what I did on the neck, which is you get yourself a kit from Stumac that has powder and super glue in it, and depending on the color of your neck, you just fill in the slot with the powder, you drop a little super glue on it, and then you cut the slot again. And I've done that. Everyone's, goes a little bit too far, but like I said, I do this very slowly to try to avoid that, and it's just not interesting enough to watch. So I will show you when I'm done. One thing I didn't mention on that last little bit was how far do you drop the string. So it's not going to come through very well on here, but I'm going to push it up and down a couple times now, and then when I'm done, I'll show you the difference. There are some tools that you can use for a specific set. I just wing it, and I put it down until the string definitely moves up and down, but is not very high above the neck. I guess I could use the 8/1000ths again, but I just do it until I'm satisfied with it. And if I go too far, then I fix the slot and I do it again. All right, so that's how far it's going up and down now. That's about 20/1000ths, which I have seen as a reference, but that's way too high. I mean, that's like manufacturer's specification, but it's not very good for playability. All right, I'm going to show you just a little bit. So I've got this string. I loosened it a little bit, but you should always check it when it's at its pitch, because the tension on the string will drive it down further into the slot. Okay, so that's at pitch. And I am pushing up and down on the string. And not terribly thrilled with that. So I'll loosen it just a little bit. Take it out of the slot. The string is 47, and I'm going to use the 42 slot cutter, and I will cut it a little bit. I'll open the back up a little bit. Then I'm going to use the 48 to make a nice round cavity in there. And I'll put the string back in. Tighten it back to E. About, and I'll check. And it's still quite high, so I'm going to go a little bit further. Now, if you're going to do this, always have at least 2 sets of strings, and possibly even buy like a 10-pack of the treble strings, like the G, the A, the E, and the B, because when you loosen and tighten the string so much like this, it's going to break because it causes fatigue on the string. So as part of the setup process, always have a couple of extra sets of strings so that if you break one, you can continue the process. Some people don't loosen the string, they just pop it out. That makes me a little nervous, I don't do that. All right, that's actually not bad. I'm gonna go just a little bit slower. There, I popped it out without loosening it. Okay. And that is perfect. Okay, so you can hear it making the tink sound, so it's still above the fret, but it's only moving like maybe 8 thousandths. So that's done. So I'm just going to repeat that process on all the other strings. Well, the nut is finished. It came out good. I'm very happy with the action. I think I probably was incorrect when I said that you should do the nut before you do the radius of the strings. Let me just move you a little closer here and show you how to do the radius. So I have a radius tool, and this radius tool has a marking on it that says 17, so it's a 17-inch radius. So what I do is you just slide that under your strings, and you check to make sure that every string is touching it, and that no string is too low or too high. And the way I do this is I just simply push on the string, and if I see the little end of the radius gauge dip, then, let's see, it's hard for me with my big fat hands, but I just basically push on it, and if the end of the radius string dips, when I push the string, I know it's making contact. So as I go across and push every single one, I just make sure every string has the proper radius. And it does. So I don't have to adjust the radius of the bridge. It is at 17. I've got the relief, I've got the nut, I've got the radius. Now it's time to check the action. So you check the action with any ruler that has 64ths on it. I actually have a string action gauge from StewMac. And you basically just, check where the bottom of the string is on above the 12th fret. And what you set it as is a matter of personal preference. If you're a heavy strummer, you might want to have a string action as high as maybe 6 64ths on the bass E string and 4 64ths on the treble. If you're doing really, technical finger picking and things like that, you can have a lower string action, like maybe 5 64ths or 4 64ths and 3 64ths. So it looks to me like the treble E string is a little high. It's at about 4 64ths, and the bass E string is 5 64ths, and that's actually kind of where I want. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take the pins out of the bridge. I'll loosen the string, take the pins out, and I am going to go ahead and just shave the action down a little bit. Now, as far as intonation, I just checked the intonation, and it is absolutely perfect, except for these 2 strings here, the A string and the D string are a little bit high on their intonation. So that means I'm going to try to pull, I'm going to shave a little bit off so that the string makes contact towards the back of the saddle, and that'll adjust the intonation. And I do that, and I'm all done, and then it's time to play it. It is finished. The guitar is done. Very happy with it. So just to remind you everything we did, initially the intonation was completely messed up, and that was due to a bad nut. The action was quite high, and the neck had a hump in it, like old guitars often do. So what I did was I pulled all the frets off, I straightened the neck, I sanded it flat to get rid of the hump. I bought a new nut from Graphtec, and I slotted it and adjusted it. I shaved the bridge lower so that after sanding the neck, because the angle had changed and the strings needed to be lower, I compensated and shaved down the saddle, and it's actually pretty low. The next time I decide to do some work, I probably will shave the bridge a little, just a little bit more. Refretted the neck, leveled those, trimmed them, did a neck setup, adjusted the action. Right now the action is 5/64 on the bass E string, 4/64 on the treble E string. It feels high in the middle, but that might be because my other acoustic has ridiculously low action, and I'm still kind of getting used to it. But the intonation is exactly perfect, and it definitely shows when you play. The chords are pretty much effortless. Another nice thing about this guitar is the neck is very slightly wider, maybe I want to say 3 millimeters, maybe 4 millimeters wider than the usual guitar neck. So whereas normally you get like a 42 millimeter nut, I got a 44 millimeter nut, and the slots in that nut are also a little bit wider, and it's actually quite noticeable. I've got big fat sausage fingers, and I can't play an A with 3 fingers on any of my guitars except the 12 string. But here I can definitely do it. Here I can definitely, my fat middle finger isn't sandwiched between the G and the E string, dulling them. Get that in there nicely. So very happy with it. Very, very happy with it. It has a nice bright sound. My Epiphone is a little bit muddier. It's kind of like, you know. This one, very nice bright sound. So that's it. Well, that's the video. I hope you enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun to make, a lot of work. I think that's like the 5th guitar neck that I've actually completely refretted and fixed up that way, and I'm tired of doing it. I don't plan to do it again. But yeah, so, you know, if you like this, like it. I don't try to make money off of YouTube, so it doesn't matter to me if you subscribe or like it or whatever, but I'm always happy to hear comments, and you guys have a nice day. Bye.